Shadowverse Worlds Beyond has now had 2 weeks to settle into its first meta, putting us in a position where we can now say what the best cards are of Legends Rise. While I have the list broken down into a rough top 10, I do think there are a few cards that are in the mix that are worth talking about and could probably break their way into a top 10 list, depending on which lens you're viewing the game, and I think they'd be totally valid choices. Looking into Portalcraft, I think cards like Metal Grade Assassin are super efficient for what they do. At 3 cost, you can get rid of effectively anything on the board, and it scales on if you ever have any additional puppets for whatever reason if Medical Grade Assassin survives moving on to the next turn. At the same time, I think Lovestruck Puppeteer is a fantastic card. It's effectively a 2-cost 3/3 where one of those stats need to be dedicated to pressuring something off the board. You can dump 3 stats into something, which you only pay 2 for, or you can split the damage, take out a 1/1 with your 1/1, and attack your 2/2 into something else to be able to deal with it there. So very efficient for what the cost is on this card. Additionally, I think Sylvia Garden Executioner is fantastic. It can clean up so many boards in which Portal has an issue with. And in general, Portal just has a really strong suit of cards that are really efficient at what they do, especially given when you talk about a card like Sylvia, where not only is she cleaning up boards, but she provides you either heal or card draw. Shifting over to Force, I think Godwood's Staff is incredibly powerful for what it does. It leans into the best strategy that Force has access to. It also plays really well with the class as a whole, just because it regenerates your cards that you're constantly playing out. So naturally the card is a phenomenal card, but it doesn't skew the game in the same way that I'm looking at when I'm looking at top 10 cards. Dimension Climb is another card in which I think is very easy to say it's one of the top 10 cards in the game. It definitely is one of the most frustrating cards in the game, but Dimension Climb also lends itself to being a bad draw. If you see it in the second half of the game, now you're in a position where you maybe don't even get it to below 10 because of the way that the game played out, and it ends up becoming a dead draw, though naturally it can also high roll into a position where you win where you didn't deserve to, or you could do something like drop a Cocytus, drop Dimension Climb, and then you just win on the spot, even when you were completely behind the entire time. So while it is incredibly swingy, I think that swinginess also plays into it being tough to claim a top 10 spot, but naturally is a very good card. Finally, looking into Sword, I think Amelia is a fantastic card. In the late game, it's one of the best draws you could potentially have. If you and your opponent have both exhausted your evolves, now you're in a position where you just need to get as much advantage as possible, and she allows you to draw and play out the things you draw because you get to recover the play points as well. And if you play her on an established board, now your entire board has barrier, which is relevant in things like the mirror match or other matchups that are very board dependent. That said, while I think she's incredibly good, she doesn't sway the matchups in the same way as my top 10 do. That said, let's break down into the top 10. I do just want to caveat that, like I said, I think it's a very loose ranking. I think you could shift cards up and down a position and still be very valid in the way that you think about it. I do think the top 4-ish 5 cards are kind of much more sealed, especially in their placement, but by all means, let me know in the comments down below if you happen to disagree. Looking at top 10, I have Apollo Heaven's Envoy. I think this card is incredibly solid for a lot of decks that need board control that don't innately have it within their class. You know, I'm looking at things like Dragon, I'm looking at things, it's very useful in Swords. Just being able to, on play, being able to deal with an entire board of weenies. It puts you in range for your other removal, and then if you want to dump and evolve on it, well then it cleans up on most early game boards. I think it's just a versatile card, and I think it leans as a crutch for a lot of decks which need that extra help for their early game. We are so close to 2K subscribers, so if you like what we do here, subscribe button down there would be much appreciated. Shifting on over into Olivia, the generic queen, which can pretty much slot into any deck if you need a slot for a couple legendaries, and she's optimal in things like Abysscraft and other similar mid-rangier, go bigger style decks. I think she's excellent for what she does. She slots into any deck. She's obviously the champion of free-to-play players if you happen to pull her, so in that sense I think you can get a lot of mileage from her. There are a few cards that synergize with being super evolved, although they're not a 10, but I think that's one of those things that are going to scale as the game goes on, where we're going to get more and more cards that care about being super evolved, even if they don't get their super evolved ability off rip. And naturally just the ability of having 2 super evolved bodies on the board, which means it's 2 attacking bodies that can't die or take damage. You ping your opponent for 2. It usually ends up helping you towards a board clear, something of the sort. Makes her incredibly strong. Shifting on over to number 8, we have Kuon, Fivefold Master. This card does everything in terms of when you get to that stage in the game. It helps you board control. It's runes one of few ways to actually burst damage, and naturally is a close closer if you are able to get to 10 play points, where now you have a 10-10, potentially a 13-13 or a 16-16, depending on how you line up your follow-up plays, to be able to deal just massive burst damage, or to just sit there as a big uninteractable body that your opponent has to attack into to get rid of. Rune would not be the deck that it is without Kuan being able to mitigate that late-ish mid-game. Similarly, and a card that I just absolutely am always frustrated by, is Geno Levin Axe Raider. This card is incredibly powerful. It is legitimately feels like a super evolve without having to super evolve. It takes no damage on swings. It can swing twice. It can attack up oftentimes in terms of the different things you're attacking into, and it generates 2 bodies that just kind of sit in the back. This card is incredibly powerful, and if it survives to see the next turn, it'll just win you the game. It can deal 20 damage with the super evo all by itself, never mind just the additional bodies that it's producing. This card's incredibly powerful, incredibly frustrating, and in my opinion, the strongest thing that Sword does, and I have lost many games to the fact that my opponent just had the Geno. Looking towards a Dragon's only inclusion on the list, I think Garyu is a big component of what makes things like Ramp Dragon even somewhat viable. Just the fact that you're getting your 3 bodies, one of them protects you, one of them applies aggression, and then if you super evolve Garyu, then you get the added benefit of having barrier on your dragon. You're able to attack face a little bit, so it provides the deck a little bit additional burst, which is always nice when you're a deck full of Stormers. So I think the card does a lot for the deck. It provides it a lot of different utility, especially when you can line up the barrier with your dragon, where you attack with your Rush Dragon first, then you super evo Garyu. Now it still has barrier. Now it's just a little bit annoying to deal with. I think the fact is that Garyu proposes a board that makes you go, huh. And then you just have to think about how are we going to deal with this specific board, and I think it does that incredibly well. And I think the games where I don't see Garyu versus the games where I do see Garyu whenever I do play Ramp Dragon, I think makes a huge difference. Jean Saintly Knight represents the 5th slot on this best cards list as just something that's incredibly powerful to be able to get down on board. She's a one-sided board wipe that also stats up things on your board, so you could line it up where you could get a few amulets on board that are able to produce bodies. You hold off until a time where you can get John down, then you pop your amulets. Now you have creatures on board that your opponent wasn't able to interact with. You boost them up, you clear your opponent's board, and she's just a hefty 6/6 warder. And the benefit is that you get to do all that without having to spend your evolve. And I think there's a lot of value in the fact that that's all based out of a fanfare. I think she's one of Havencraft's saving graces, even if I think the strategy is not that great, but I think she's going to be a card that's going to be very annoying to deal with in subsequent sets, even if Haven's on a position to be able to fully utilize her to the best of their ability this early on in this first meta. Going into 4, and we have Cerberus. The flexibility of this card is absolutely phenomenal. Not only does she provide board control by being able to buff up the board and being able to produce Mimi and Coco, which have rush innately, but also when you super evo her, it means that you're able to double up on the burn or the heal. So now you're in a position where you could potentially heal 6 or deal 6 on top of the 1 ping that you're going to get off her super evo, as well as the board control, because of course she's able to pump up the board by additional +2/+0, which means Mimi comes down as a 4/1 with Coco coming down as a 3/2. Provides a lot of utility, a lot of bodies. If Abysscraft had anything on board before that, now you're getting additional pressure, which could potentially just close out the game right there. The card's incredibly flexible and is going to be a powerful card going into the future, probably for quite a while for Abysscraft. Coming up on my 3rd, and I think there's argument on whether this card is 2nd or 1st, depending on how much you like playing against Rune. But and Greya come up as the 3rd slot. On play, they're able to give you a spell boost 3. They produce a 5/5 ward, and they're able to ping for 3 if you evolve them. They're great at board control. They're great at applying bodies. The 5/5 is surprisingly annoying once it comes down, because you're dumping resources to getting rid of something. If you're trying to get rid of Anne and Grey without like straight removal, that you're getting rid of a body that was going to go away anyways. So now you're just kind of wasting resources. And then the spell boost 3, alongside with a few early game plays, puts you in a position where maybe you're just dropping a bunch of flame demons a turn afterward. This card does a huge difference in terms of being able to effectively play Declimb in a way that's actually competitive. And I think based on a few crash outs that I've seen on Twitter that she might not be people's favorite. In that same vein, however, I feel that way about Alouette Doomright Ward. I think this card is incredibly valuable in what it does for Portal, especially with how flexible the artifact engine is. If you need a board wipe, if you need a heal, or if you need direct damage to the opponent's face, you can produce any of those as you make your way through to Alouette. Being able to get 10 cost worth of stats on the board between the 4-6 of Alouette and then any variation of the stats from the different artifact pieces is incredibly backbreaking. And I think it hurts mostly because it's not just very cost efficient in terms of what you're getting on the board, but because of its toolbox nature of just being whatever you need for whatever matchup. Are you playing against a slower deck? Let's punch them in the face. Are you playing against a board deck? Let's clear their board. Am I being rushed down? Well, then let's make sure I get some heals across. So the card's incredibly powerful. The games in which you see or don't see Alouette are night and day, and I think she skews a lot of kind of what we're seeing with the meta in the first couple of weeks. And to close out, to no one's surprise because we haven't seen her on the list yet, Orcus Newfound Heart is probably the most frustrating card to deal with, but unquestionably one of, if not the most powerful card in the set. It comes down as a 5/5. It produces a 1/6 that kind of attracts all abilities to it. So you're now effectively protecting Orcus while that puppet's still on the board. And then finally, all your puppets gain Bane and Storm, which would be fine on its own if it weren't for the fact that on Super Evo, she also produces 2 enhanced puppets. So now you have a world in which potentially you're getting hit for 8 between the Orcus Super Evolved Swing, which will ping for 1, and then the 1/6 and 3/3 swings. If somehow throughout the game, Orcus has also been able to hold onto another puppet in hand, you're also going to be swung for an additional 3 in the face. And so it's just a lot of burst, but it's the burst damage tied to the fact that they also all have Bane. So effectively, Orcus can deal with any board. So she's fantastic if your opponent has played anything. And she's fantastic on an open board because she can just smash face for 7 damage. So now you're in a position where you have a phenomenal card at any point in the game that is able to burst you down, able to deal with your board, and then is annoying to get rid of specifically because of the protection mechanics built into the cards. All in all, it just makes her an incredibly powerful card that's versatility can be applied to any point once you get to 8 cost or higher, and is something you need to account for every single turn moving forward, because just your opponent being able to drop 1 or 2 Orcuses will probably decide the fate of that game, almost always to their benefit. With that said, though, you might not agree with my list, so let me know in the comments down below what you think I got wrong, and I'll catch you guys on our next one.